That thought came to me on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, standing in my own kitchen, holding a mug that had gone cold in my hands. The house was too quiet for 4 o'clock. No television murmuring in the background, no hum of conversation, just the faint ticking of the clock above the sink, marking time like it was counting down to something I hadn't been told about yet. My mother-in-law's voice echoed in my head, sweet and careful, the way she always spoke when she was hiding something. You should really think about what's best for everyone, dear. At the time, I didn't know what she meant. I only knew the way she said everyone didn't include me. I had been married to Daniel for 13 years. Not the kind of marriage people write books about, but the kind people live inside every day, comfortable, worn in, imperfect. We had routines instead of romance now. Coffee brewed at 6 every morning, his socks left beside the bed instead of in the hamper. Sunday dinners with his parents without fail because family is everything. According to his mother, Lorraine. I believed that once, I truly did. Our house wasn't big, but it was ours, or at least I thought it was. Beige siding, creaky steps on the porch, and a pear tree in the backyard that never quite produced edible fruit. I loved that house anyway. I loved the way the afternoon sun slanted through the living room window and warmed the carpet. I loved the smell of garlic and onions lingering after dinner. I loved the sense of being rooted. Daniel used to come up behind me while I cooked, wrap his arms around my waist and rest his chin on my shoulder. "You always make this place feel like home," he once said. I held onto that memory longer than I should have. In the early years, his family welcomed me with open arms, or at least I thought they did. Lorraine hugged me tightly at every gathering, her perfume sharp and floral. His father, Robert, nodded approvingly when I spoke, though he never really listened. His sister, Elaine, smiled often but asked too many questions about my job, my savings, my parents. "Just curious," she'd say, tilting her head. "We're family now." I wanted to belong, so I answered. I shared, I trusted. Daniel worked in logistics, long hours, steady pay. I worked part-time at a local accounting office, enough to keep my independence but still be home in the evenings. We didn't have children, not by choice at first, and later by quiet acceptance. That absence created a space in our marriage, but it wasn't empty. We filled it with routines, with work, with family obligations, especially his family. Every Sunday we drove the same route to Lorraine's house. Same white fence, same rose bushes trimmed too neatly, same table set with too many dishes, as if abundance itself could prove something. Lorraine would press food onto my plate even after I said I was full. "You're too thin," she'd say. "Daniel likes a woman who eats." Daniel would laugh but not correct her. At the time, I thought that was just her way, overbearing but harmless. Looking back now, I realize those dinners weren't just meals. They were meetings. I just didn't know I wasn't part of the agenda. The first real crack appeared quietly. Daniel started coming home later than usual. Not dramatically late, just late enough to be noticed. His phone stayed face down on the table. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it and say, "Work," before I even asked. Lorraine began calling more often. Not to chat. She was never much for idle conversation, but to ask pointed questions. "How are things between you and Daniel? Have you thought about your future? Do you ever worry about stability?" Once, while helping her clear dishes, she leaned in close and lowered her voice. "A woman needs to be prepared, you know. Men change." I laughed it off, but my stomach tightened. Then there was the envelope. It arrived in the mail one afternoon while Daniel was still at work. Plain white, no return address. Inside was a pamphlet from a local mediation firm, divorce and family law services, highlighted in yellow. My name was spelled correctly, Daniel's too. I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. When Daniel came home, I asked him about it as casually as I could. "Oh," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Probably a mistake. You know how those ads are." He tossed it in the trash like it was nothing. But that night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, slow and even, while my mind raced. People don't accidentally mail pamphlets with both spouses' names on them. Someone had requested that information. Someone close. Still, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. 13 years doesn't just disappear. Love doesn't evaporate overnight. Families don't conspire. Do they? The next Sunday at dinner, I noticed Lorraine and Elaine exchanging glances across the table. Small ones, quick, like a silent language I wasn't fluent in. Robert cleared his throat when I spoke, interrupting me mid-sentence. "Anyway," he said, turning to Daniel, "we should talk about your plans." "What plans?" I asked. Lorraine smiled tightly. "Oh, nothing you need to worry about right now, dear." That word again, dear, soft, dismissive. I felt like a guest in my own marriage. The moment that changed everything came later that week, when I overheard a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. Daniel had stepped outside to take it, but the kitchen window was cracked open. I was washing dishes, the water running, when I heard Lorraine's voice drifting through the screen. "She doesn't suspect a thing," she said. A pause. "Yes, the lawyer says timing is everything." My hands froze in the soapy water. Daniel's voice was low, strained. "I just don't want this to get messy." Lorraine replied, firm and reassuring. "It won't. We've planned this carefully. I dried my hands slowly, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. 13 years of marriage reduced to a plan, a strategy, something discussed without me about me. That was the moment I understood. My divorce wasn't a possibility. It was already in motion. And the people I sat across from every Sunday, the people who smiled, who hugged me, who called me family, were the ones orchestrating my exit. I didn't cry right then. I listened, and I remembered everything. After that phone call, nothing looked the same. I still cooked dinner, still folded Daniel's laundry, still kissed him good night, but it felt like I was walking through my own life, wearing someone else's shoes, everything familiar, yet wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. The house was dim and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching steam rise from my mug. My reflection stared back at me in the dark window, tired eyes, hair pulled into a loose knot, a woman who had trusted too easily for too long. I didn't confront Daniel, not yet. Lorraine's words echoed in my head. "We've planned this carefully." Careful people don't panic. Careful people slip when they think they've already won. I decided to wait. Daniel became distant in small, deniable ways. He stopped asking how my day was. He stopped complaining about work. When I spoke, his attention drifted his phone, the TV, the wall behind me. It was like he was slowly stepping back from our shared life, inch by inch, so I wouldn't notice the space growing between us. One evening, I mentioned we were running low on groceries. "I'll take care of it," he said quickly, too quickly. "You always do," I replied, and watched his jaw tighten. Money had never been a major issue between us. We had separate accounts for personal expenses and a joint account for the house, utilities, and savings. Or so I thought. A few days later, I logged into our joint account to pay the electric bill. The balance was lower than expected. Not dangerously low, but noticeably off. I scrolled through the transactions, a withdrawal I didn't recognize. Then another, both labeled vaguely, consultation fee. My chest tightened. That night, while Daniel showered, I checked the mail again. More envelopes had arrived, bank statements I'd never seen before, addressed to him only. I didn't open them. I just held them, feeling the weight of paper and secrets. At dinner that night, I asked casually, "Have we had any unexpected expenses lately?" Daniel didn't look up from his plate. "Not really." His fork scraped the dish too hard. The sound grated on my nerves. Sunday came again. Lorraine greeted me with her usual hug, but her arms didn't linger this time. Elaine barely met my eyes. Robert kept checking his watch. During dessert, Lorraine clasped her hands together and sighed. "Marriage is such a delicate thing," she said, staring directly at me. "Sometimes love just changes." Daniel shifted beside me. I felt it even though he didn't touch me. I smiled politely. "Love takes work." "Yes," Lorraine agreed, her lips curling slightly, "and sometimes letting go is the kindest thing." No one contradicted her. On the drive home, the silence between Daniel and me felt heavy, almost deliberate. "Your mother seems concerned," I said carefully. "She worries too much," he replied, eyes fixed on the road. But his voice lacked conviction. The real unraveling began with a mistake they didn't think I'd catch. A week later, Elaine stopped by unexpectedly while Daniel was at work. She stood on the porch, purse clutched tight, eyes darting past me into the house. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "Thought I'd check in." We sat in the living room. She didn't take off her coat. "So," she said, crossing her legs, "have you thought about next steps?" "Next steps for what?" I asked. She hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. "Life, you know, security, independence." There it was again. That word. "I'm married." I said calmly, "That is my security." Elaine's smile faltered. "Marriage isn't always permanent." The room felt colder suddenly. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I asked. She stood up too quickly. "I should go." As she reached the door, a folded paper slipped from her purse and fluttered to the floor. She froze. I picked it up before she could stop me. It was a draft, a typed document titled Proposed Separation Agreement. My name was printed neatly at the top. Elaine's face drained of color. "You weren't supposed to see that." "No," I said quietly. "I suppose I wasn't." She left without another word. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, my legs shaking. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't miscommunication. This was coordination. They weren't just preparing Daniel to leave me. They were preparing my replacement. That night, I confronted Daniel not with anger, but with truth. I placed the document on the kitchen table between us. "Your sister dropped this." He stared at it for a long moment, then sat down heavily. "It's not what it looks like," he said. I laughed softly, a sound that surprised even me. "Then explain it." He rubbed his face with both hands. "My parents think it would be better if we separated." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone," he said, echoing his mother's words. "What about me?" My voice barely trembled. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Over the next few days, pieces began to fall into place. Lorraine had spoken to a lawyer. Elaine had helped gather financial information. Robert had advised Daniel on protecting assets that included the house I paid into, the savings I contributed to, the life I helped build. They had decided I was expendable, not because I was cruel, not because I was unfaithful, but because I was inconvenient. I had no children to anchor me, no family nearby, no loud voice at the table. I was easy to remove. The betrayal didn't explode all at once. It settled into me slowly, like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. Grief mixed with anger. Love curdled into disbelief. But beneath it all, something else began to form. Clarity. If they had planned my divorce behind my back, then I would face it with my eyes open. I stopped reacting. I started observing, and what I saw next would change everything. Once I stopped reacting, I started seeing everything. It was as if someone had adjusted the focus on a camera lens, and suddenly the blurry edges of my life sharpened into painful clarity. Conversations I had brushed off before now sounded scripted. Kind gestures felt rehearsed. Even Daniel's silences carried intention. I began to listen more than I spoke. At dinner, when Daniel mentioned he might need to restructure finances, I nodded instead of asking questions. When Lorraine called to check in, her voice syrupy with concern, I thanked her and kept my answers vague. I became, in their eyes, agreeable, unthreatening. Inside, I was taking notes. The first thing I did was visit the bank during my lunch break. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as I sat with the teller, a woman about my age with tired eyes and neat braids. I asked for a full printout of our joint account history for the past year. She glanced at my ID, then at the screen. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. "I just need to understand something," I replied. As the pages slid across the counter, my stomach sank. Withdrawals I hadn't noticed before. Transfers into an account I didn't recognize. Consultation fees. Retainer fees legal. I thanked her and folded the papers carefully, like they might break if I wasn't gentle enough. On the walk back to my car, the wind cut through my coat. I felt exposed, like my life had been laid bare in black ink and numbers. They weren't just planning a divorce. They were preparing to leave me with as little as possible. That evening, I made Daniel his favorite meal: roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic. He noticed. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I wanted to," I replied, setting the plate in front of him. "We should take care of each other." He looked at me for a long moment, guilt flickering across his face before he looked away. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I quietly unlocked his phone. I had never done that before, not once in 13 years. The weight of that realization pressed on me as much as the truth I was about to uncover. There it was, a group chat, family first. Messages scrolled past my eyes, my hands trembling slightly as I read. "Lorraine, the lawyer says the house needs to be listed before she suspects anything. Elaine, she won't fight. She never does. Robert, Daniel, you need to be firm. This is about protecting what's ours. Daniel, I know, I just don't want to hurt her. Lorraine, she'll be fine, she's strong. Besides, it's better this way." I set the phone down carefully, like it might scream if I dropped it. I went into the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the floor tiles until my vision blurred. Not because I wanted to cry, but because my body needed a moment to accept what my heart already knew. They had turned my marriage into a transaction. The next morning, I called in sick to work and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down everything I knew: dates, conversations, names, amounts. I also wrote down what I needed. Information, time, control. I searched for a lawyer, not the one Lorraine recommended, not the one Daniel had already spoken to. I chose a woman named Patricia, whose office was small and unassuming, tucked between a florist and a tailor. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. "This isn't uncommon," she said finally. "Family-driven divorces happen more than people realize. But the financial coordination, that's something we can address." "What do I do?" I asked. She looked at me kindly. "You stop being invisible." At home, I began to change small things. I redirected my paycheck into a new account. I gathered copies of tax returns, mortgage documents, insurance policies. I photographed everything and stored it in a secure folder. I also started asking questions, innocent ones at first. "Daniel," I said one evening, "do you know where the deed to the house is?" He stiffened. "Why, just organizing," I replied lightly. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. "I think it's in the file cabinet." It wasn't. I found it later that night, tucked inside a folder labeled planning. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Daniel grew irritable, snapping at small things. Lorraine's calls increased, her tone shifting from sweet to impatient. "You seem distant," she said one afternoon. "Are you hiding something from us?" The irony almost made me laugh. "No," I said. "I'm just thinking." "Well," she replied, her voice tightening, "thinking too much can be dangerous." I realized then that they sensed the shift. My silence no longer felt compliant. It felt calculated. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One Friday evening, Daniel sat me down at the kitchen table. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white. "My parents think we should talk about options," he said. I met his eyes steadily. "I already know about the lawyer, about the accounts, about the house." His face crumpled. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." He reached for my hand. I pulled away. I loved you, I said. But you let them turn you into someone I don't recognize. He whispered my name, but it sounded like an apology that came too late. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already taken my first real step forward. And soon, everyone would know the truth. The night after Daniel tried to talk about options, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed, facing the window, watching the thin line of streetlight crawl across the ceiling as cars passed outside. Daniel slept restlessly behind me, sighing every so often like his conscience was trying to wake him up. Mine was wide awake. In the early hours of the morning, when the house felt hollow and honest, I finally let myself feel it. Not just the anger, but the grief. 13 years isn't just time, it's muscle memory. It's knowing how someone takes their coffee, which cupboard they reach for without looking, how their breathing changes when they're anxious. And still, they had decided I was something to be handled. By the time the sun came up, something inside me had hardened not into bitterness, but into resolve. The discovery that broke what was left of my illusion came 2 days later. I was home early from work, the house empty, when I heard the front door open. Voices followed Lorraine's unmistakable clipped tone and Elaine's softer, sharper one. I froze in the hallway, my purse still on my shoulder. They hadn't expected me. We need to move faster, Lorraine was saying. She's starting to ask questions. Elaine replied, Daniel's getting cold feet. Lorraine scoffed. Then he needs reminding, this house was never meant to be hers. I stepped into the living room. Lorraine jumped. Elaine gasped, one hand flying to her chest. Oh, Lorraine said quickly, smoothing her hair. You're home early. Yes, I replied, my voice steady. And I'm glad I am. Elaine looked at the floor. Lorraine straightened her back, the way she did when she felt challenged. We were just discussing family matters, she said. You mean my marriage? I corrected. Lorraine's smile thinned. Daniel is our son, and I am his wife. Silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Elaine spoke, her voice trembling. This doesn't have to be ugly. I let out a slow breath. It already is. Lorraine crossed her arms. You have to understand we're thinking long term. Daniel needs protection, stability. From me? I asked. Lorraine didn't answer right away. When she did, her honesty surprised me. You don't bring anything forward, she said. No children, no family support, no leverage. The words landed like a slap. So you plan my divorce? I said quietly, because I was inconvenient. Lorraine met my gaze without flinching. Because you were replaceable. Something broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, quiet break like a bone snapping under pressure. I nodded slowly. Thank you for saying it out loud. Elaine started crying. Mom, Lorraine raised a hand. Enough. I picked up my purse. You should go. This is Daniel's house. Lorraine snapped. I looked her straight in the eye. It's mine too, and until a judge says otherwise, I'm not the one leaving. They left without another word. I stood alone in the living room, my heart pounding, my hands cold. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply stood there, absorbing the truth in its rawest form. They never saw me as family. They saw me as a placeholder. When Daniel came home that evening, I told him everything. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke calmly, deliberately, the way someone does when they've already crossed the emotional bridge. They were here today, I said. His face went pale. What? They said the quiet parts out loud. I continued. About the house, about me being replaceable. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. I never wanted it to go this far, but you let it, I said. He looked up at me, eyes red. I didn't know how to stop them. I studied him for a long moment. This man I had loved. This man who had chosen comfort over courage. Then this is where I stop you, I said. The formal betrayal came in a manila envelope 3 days later. Divorce papers. Filed, not discussed. Not agreed upon. Filed. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding them like they weighed 100 pounds. My parents think it's best, he said weakly. I took the envelope, sat at the table, and opened it. My name looked strange on those pages, flattened, legal, stripped of everything human. There it was in black and white, proposed asset division that favored him heavily. The house listed as a family contribution, my years of payments minimized, my sacrifices erased. I closed the folder carefully. "No," I said. Daniel frowned. "No, no." I repeated, "This isn't happening the way they planned. Lorraine called that night." I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped, irritated. "We need to resolve this quickly. Dragging it out will only hurt everyone. Everyone." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I met with Patricia again. I slid the divorce papers across her desk. They filed. She read them carefully, her expression tightening. "This is aggressive. So am I said. She looked up, a small approving smile forming. "Good, because now we notice the financial manipulation, the coordinated pressure, the intent. What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, "this isn't just a divorce anymore." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to power, not the kind that seeks revenge, but the kind that restores balance. Word traveled quickly, friends called, neighbors whispered. Daniel's parents began spinning their version quietly, carefully. A story where I was difficult, cold, uncooperative. I didn't correct them. I didn't have to, because the truth has a way of surfacing when people underestimate your silence. And soon, the very family that planned my divorce behind my back would be forced to explain their actions out loud, to people who mattered far more than me. The weeks that followed felt like a long, measured breath, slow, controlled, and heavy with anticipation. I moved through my days with a quiet purpose: work, meetings, phone calls with Patricia. Late evenings spent sorting documents at the dining table, the lamp casting a soft yellow circle over piles of paper that represented my life reduced to evidence. Daniel tried a few times to talk to me. He hovered in doorways, asked if I'd eaten, commented on the weather. Once he said we didn't have to get lawyers involved. I looked up from my paperwork. "You did that the moment you let your family plan my exit." He nodded, shame folding him inward, and retreated. At night, I slept in the guest room. The bed was firmer, the sheets unfamiliar, but the space felt honest. There were no expectations there, no pretending. The first official meeting happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Lorraine arrived with Daniel and Robert, dressed in dark, serious colors, as if mourning something they still believed belonged to them. Elaine wasn't there. Later, I learned she couldn't handle the stress. I sat beside Patricia, hands folded neatly in my lap. Lorraine smiled when she saw me, that same tight smile she'd always worn when she wanted to appear gracious. "We're glad you came to your senses," she said softly. Patricia leaned forward. "This is not a reconciliation meeting. This is a legal discussion." Lorraine blinked, thrown off by the interruption. As the conversation unfolded, the truth began to stretch its legs. Patricia laid out the financial discrepancies calmly, methodically. The unexplained transfers, the coordinated timing of legal consultations, the attempt to list the house without my consent. Robert cleared his throat. "We were just advising our son." "Advising is one thing," Patricia replied. "Executing a plan to disadvantage his spouse is another." Daniel stared at the table. When Lorraine finally spoke, her voice sharpened. "We were protecting our family. I couldn't help myself," I spoke. "You decided I wasn't family," I said. "That's the difference." The room went quiet. The shift happened not with shouting, but with exposure. Emails were introduced, text messages, the group chat titled Family First. Lorraine's face tightened as Patricia read portions aloud. Phrases like "she won't fight," and "this house was never meant to be hers" hung in the air, stripped of context and excuses. Daniel looked physically ill. "This was never meant to be seen like this," Lorraine said. "That's usually how truth works," Patricia replied. The meeting ended without resolution, but the balance had shifted. For the first time, they realized I wasn't alone. Word of the meeting spread quickly. Daniel's extended family began to ask questions, quiet ones at first. Then louder. People who had watched me show up for holidays, funerals, birthdays, people who remembered the casseroles I brought, the rides I offered, the help I gave. Stories have weight when they're told by more than one voice. Lorraine stopped calling me. Instead, she called Daniel repeatedly. He began spending evenings outside, pacing the driveway with his phone pressed to his ear. One night, he came inside looking hollowed out. "They're angry," he said. "They think I didn't defend them." I folded a towel carefully before answering. "Did you?" He shook his head. "Then that's your answer." The public consequence came in an unexpected way. Lorraine was active in her church, organized events, led committees. Reputation mattered to her more than comfort. When the pastor's wife, someone I'd quietly known for years, asked me how I was holding up, I told the truth. Calmly, factually, without embellishment. I didn't name names. I didn't assign motives. I just told my story. Within weeks, Lorraine stepped down from her position to focus on family matters. Elaine stopped attending events altogether. People began to see the pattern not just in my story, but in others Lorraine had touched. Control doesn't age well under light. Daniel tried one last time to salvage something between us. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyes red, voice shaking. "I should have chosen you." I studied his face, the familiar lines, the fear, the regret. "You had 13 years to choose me. I was scared," he whispered. "I know," I said, "but fear is a choice too." That was the moment I let go, not in anger, but in acceptance. The settlement came quietly. The house was sold, and I received my fair share, more than they ever intended. The savings were divided properly. The legal record reflected the attempted manipulation. Lorraine never apologized. Robert avoided eye contact. Elaine sent a brief message that said, "I'm sorry things went this way." Daniel signed the final papers with shaking hands. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse alone, the sun warm on my face. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The guest room no longer felt temporary. It felt like a beginning. After the settlement, the noise finally died down. No more emails from lawyers. No more tense phone calls, no more whispers trailing behind my name. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. I moved out of the house first. Not because I had to, but because I wanted my leaving to be on my terms. I packed slowly, deliberately. Each box held a memory I examined before sealing away photographs, mismatched mugs, holiday decorations wrapped in yellowing tissue paper. Some things I kept. Others I left behind without ceremony. On my last morning there, I walked through each room barefoot. The walls were bare, the air echoing. I stood in the kitchen where so much of my life had unfolded and rested my hand on the counter, cool and smooth. "This is where I learned how strong I am," I whispered, then I closed the door. My new apartment was smaller, quieter, and entirely mine. Sunlight streamed through the windows in the late afternoon. The floors creaked in a way that felt friendly. The first night, I ate takeout straight from the container and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, laughing softly at the absurdity of it all. I slept with the windows open, listening to unfamiliar sounds, traffic, laughter, a distant siren. I slept anyway. Daniel reached out once more weeks later. He asked if we could talk. Just talk. We met at a coffee shop near my new place. Neutral ground. He looked older somehow, as if the weight he'd avoided for years had finally settled onto his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said, staring into his cup, "for all of it." "I know," I replied. "I didn't realize how much I let them control me." I nodded. "You didn't lose me to your parents, Daniel. You lost me to your silence." He swallowed hard. "I hope you're happy," he said. "I am," I answered, surprising both of us. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small moments. The first morning I woke up without dread. The first evening, I cooked for myself and enjoyed it. The first time I realized I hadn't thought about Lorraine all day. I started walking in the evenings, letting the rhythm of my steps ground me. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted from. I began saying no without explanation. There were still quiet pangs of grief. 13 years don't disappear just because a chapter ends. But the pain no longer owned me. One afternoon, months later, I received a message from Elaine. She asked if we could meet. We sat on a park bench, watching children play in the distance. She fidgeted with her hands. I didn't stop her. She said, "I should have." "Yes," I replied gently. "You should have." She nodded, tears forming. "I'm trying to be different." "I hope you are," I said. "For your sake." We parted without hugging. It felt appropriate. The real closure came unexpectedly. I ran into Lorraine at the grocery store one evening. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. Our eyes met briefly in the aisle. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I nodded politely and continued shopping. That was it, no confrontation. No final words. Sometimes closure is just the absence of fear. I spent my first holiday alone by choice. I cooked a small meal, lit a candle, and sat at the table without rushing. I thought about the woman I'd been, eager to please, afraid to disrupt, grateful for crumbs of acceptance. Then I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who knew her worth without needing permission. The lesson came slowly, but it stayed. Family isn't who plans your exit when you're inconvenient. Love isn't something that requires silence to survive. And marriage, real marriage, doesn't leave room for conspiracies. I wasn't broken by what they did. I was clarified. Life didn't rush to fill the space they left behind. And for the first time, I didn't rush either. I let mornings unfold slowly. I learned the sound of my new neighborhood. The delivery trucks backing up at dawn, the neighbor's dog barking exactly twice before settling, the soft hum of traffic that reminded me the world was moving even when I stood still. Healing, I learned, isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's choosing yourself in small, almost forgettable ways. I changed my hair. Nothing drastic, just enough to feel like I was meeting a new version of myself in the mirror. I donated clothes that belonged to a life I no longer lived. I bought a chair I loved, even though no one else would ever sit in it but me. That felt like progress. People started asking questions, not out of cruelty but curiosity. Divorce invites speculation the way storms invite clouds. Some asked gently, others didn't. What really happened? Was it mutual? Do you still talk to his family? I answered honestly, but briefly. I had learned the difference between truth and exposure. They made plans without me. I'd say, and I decided I deserved better. Most people nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. That wasn't my burden anymore. One evening, I found myself sorting through an old box I hadn't opened since the move. Inside were photographs, holidays, birthdays, moments frozen in time. Daniel's arm around my shoulders. Lorraine smiling stiffly at the edge of a frame. Elaine standing close, but never quite touching. I studied each image carefully. None of them showed the full truth. Photographs don't capture silence. They don't record power dynamics or whispered plans. They don't reveal who leaves the room when decisions are made. I put the photos back in the box and slid it into the closet. Not hidden, just stored. Some memories don't need daily access. The real test of healing came when I was invited to a wedding. A mutual friend, same crowd, same social circle that once felt like an extension of my marriage. I hesitated, invitation in hand, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I considered declining. Then I asked myself a question that had become my compass. Am I avoiding this because it hurts or because I'm afraid? I went. I wore a dress I loved. I arrived on my own. I smiled when people greeted me, and I left when I was ready. I didn't scan the room for Daniel. I didn't brace for Lorraine. When I got home, I sat on my couch and laughed softly to myself. I had survived something I once thought would break me. Months passed, the anger softened, the grief loosened its grip. What remained was a clear, wide understanding of who I was, and who I refused to be again. I no longer over-explained. I no longer begged for harmony at my own expense. I listened to discomfort instead of dismissing it. Boundaries, I learned, aren't walls. They're doors you choose when to open. One afternoon, while walking through a local bookstore, I overheard a woman on the phone whispering urgently. "He doesn't know yet," she said. "His mother is already talking to a lawyer." The words stopped me cold. I didn't intervene. I didn't insert myself, but I hoped quietly that woman would listen to the part of herself that felt uneasy, that she wouldn't mistake manipulation for love, that she would ask questions early, because silence doesn't protect marriages. It protects agendas. I began writing not for an audience, not for justice, but for clarity. Pages filled with reflections, fragments of memory, lessons learned too late and just in time. I wrote about how betrayal rarely announces itself loudly, how it often arrives disguised as concern, how the most dangerous plans are the ones made politely. Writing helped me forgive not them but myself, for trusting, for staying quiet, for believing proximity meant loyalty. The final thread of healing tied itself one quiet evening. I was cooking dinner, music playing softly, windows open to let in the breeze. I caught my reflection in the darkened glass, relaxed, grounded, whole. And it hit me then. They didn't ruin my life, they revealed it. They showed me what I was surviving, and what I was capable of building once I stopped shrinking. I don't know what became of Daniel's family after that. I don't wonder, because my life is no longer a reaction to theirs. It's a response to my own worth. There are nights now when I sit in my quiet living room, the lights low, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I think about how easily I could have stayed. I could have stayed silent. I could have accepted being managed instead of loved. I could have let other people decide when my chapter was over. And for a long time I almost did. What I've learned is this: betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern. Sometimes it sounds like advice. Sometimes it looks like family meetings you're not invited to. If you feel like decisions are being made about your life without your voice in the room, listen to that feeling. It's not paranoia, it's awareness. I used to believe strength meant holding everything together. Now I know it also means knowing when to step away with your dignity intact. So I'll ask you this gently: if you discovered the people closest to you were planning your exit, would you stay quiet or would you choose yourself? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt pushed aside, underestimated, or quietly betrayed, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you want to hear more real life stories about family, truth, and finding your way back to yourself, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never let anyone plan your life without your consent.